Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little about WrestleMania Night 1. WrestleMania Night 1 was incredible. I went into the show honestly thinking, I'm not too excited about this show. It's whatever, it's going to be blah. The main event was Ronda Rousey versus Charlotte Flair. Charlotte, I didn't even want in the match. I'm like, why the hell didn't they do Becky Lynch? That's the storyline that made the most sense. Becky Lynch was the one that um, defeated Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania 35 3 years ago, and Ronda's arm didn't even go down. And I thought, they could have did some kind of storyline where Ronda comes back and says, "You know what, Becky? When you had your proudest moment, when you were Becky Two Belts back in the New York City area, in 2019, you didn't have your proudest moments. You didn't really beat me. My arm wasn't even down, and they could have took it back to the days of Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan, because in 1987, when Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan had their very historic match at WrestleMania 3, Andre the Giant actually pinned Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan went up for the body slam early in the match. He didn't get him down, and Joey Morella's hand actually went down for the three. And that was actually the basis for their Saturday night's main event rematch, the following year, 1988, in which Ted DiBiase debuted. So I thought Ronda and Becky Lynch could do something like that. So I'm like, why are they doing uh, Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair? It seemed like even in 2019, Charlotte Flair was a shoe in. Even then, the story was Becky and Ronda since Survivor Series 2018. That was the main story. And just even when they put Charlotte in a WrestleMania match 3 years ago, it seemed like it didn't make any sense. Okay, some of the other matches. Logan Paul involvement. Logan Paul teaming with The Miz to take on um, Rey Mysterio and Dominic. I don't really like the Mysterios as a tag team. I thought, you know, Dominic should have been turned heel. I think him turning heel would give him that edge. And there's that built-in storyline from back in 2005 when Eddie Guerrero was revealed to be his kayfabe father. He could tell Ray, "Listen, Dad, you lied to me. You told me that you were my father all these years." And then Eddie Guerrero came out. Eddie Guerrero revealed that he is actually my papi. Remember the your papi T-shirts and stuff. They could have went with that. Even when Seth Rollins was doing the Monday Night Messiah thing, Seth Rollins had the cult with Murphy. Dominic could have joined that, reminiscent of Raven and Sandman from ECW in 1996. Well, they didn't. They continue on with the tag team, and that brings us to here. Now, as far as Logan Paul's involvement, he was there last year. He did nothing in the Sami Zayn Kevin Owens match, so I didn't expect anything here. I know that he and his brother are lighting up Triller with their fights. Um, his brother, of course, taking on Tyron Woodley, taking on Nate Robinson, taking on Floyd Mayweather, and he himself taking on other YouTube UK personality KSI. So I know people are really attracted to them. They have a huge following. They're huge celebrities that basically define the new YouTube influencer era. But I'm like, how far can they take it? Um, Other matches, Shinsuke Nakamura with Rick Boogs. I don't really watch um, SmackDown a lot, so I'm not familiar with Rick Boogs. So that's gonna be the first match that I'm gonna really cover. Well, when I saw the Rick Boogs thing, I'm like, who is this lame ass guy coming out, with Shinsuke Nakamura? You're like, this is lame. Shinsuke Nakamura, when he first, in 2018, when he first transitioned from the NXT to the main roster, he was an international star already. He had international rep in Japan. And, I expected him to do big things. First Japanese person ever to win the Royal Rumble. The same night with him, when Asuka won the Women's Royal Rumble, the first one ever. And it was like two Japanese people, two Asians, back to back, winning the Royal Rumble. So I thought they were going to do big things with him, and now he is where he is, and the mighty have fallen. At least give the man the tag team championships. Apparently this new act with Rick Boogs was really getting over. So I thought, okay, they're going to win. Well, in the middle of the match, both the Usos jump on top of Rick Boogs. He tries to do a move like these firemen carrying them, kind of like John Cena did in 2009 when he did it to Edge and Big Show in the triple threat match. But in the whole match, they're pushing how super strong Rick Boogs is. Well, Rick Boogs' knee gives out, and I'm thinking, okay, this is a work. But apparently it wasn't a work. Apparently I went online later and I found out that this is indeed a shoot, and that Rick Boogs was really hurt, and that Boogs and Nakamura were supposed to win the SmackDown Tag Team Championship, but they didn't. The Usos called an audible. They're real pros. But what I want to know is what possessed the Usos to agree to doing a spot like that. Just because John Cena has done it before and just because it has been done doesn't necessarily mean that Boogs should have injured, should have went for the risk. Either Jimmy or Jay should have been like, called an audible, said, no, Rick, we're not doing that. But anyway, they called an audible with this at the last minute. And they retained the SmackDown Tag Team Championships with 1D on Shinsuke, and they covered them. Well, we got to see. Maybe Rick Boogs, is out forever. He could just be Shinsuke's manager with the guitar thing. I think the act is lame. Me personally, it's lame, but apparently it's over. Another match, Becky Lynch's match with Bianca Belair. Now, I said in the beginning of the video that I thought Becky Lynch should have wrestled Ronda Rousey. That was the natural storyline from a couple of years ago, but that's not what happened. They chose to go with big match Bex taking on last year's winner, the winner of the 2021 Women's Royal Rumble, and the winner of the historic match that main evented last year with Sasha Banks. So basically, the build was the only two women that have ever main evented WrestleMania up until this point, wrestling one another. And it's revenge, of course, for SummerSlam 2021 when Becky Lynch came back from her pregnancy and totally demolished Bianca Belair. Well, they called back to that spot in this match. I thought this match, somebody was telling me that this match would possibly be a hair match. So then you knew Bianca was going to go over because I can't see Bianca cutting her hair just for this match. So, but it wasn't a hair match, but Bianca went for a handshake immediately like she did when Becky first came back at SummerSlam. Becky slaps her, and throughout the match, Becky is pummeling her. Bianca is selling like a boss. This makes me think that Bianca Belair will be an ultimate babyface. Because if you recall the match from last year, most of it was Sasha Banks selling. Most of it was Sasha taking bumps. Bianca had even put Sasha up in a gorilla press slam. She really wasn't doing a lot of selling. And the mark of a great babyface, Jim Cornette and other people always say this, is that a babyface sells. The greatest babyface of all time, Hulk Hogan, Hulk Hogan, Bret Hart, Stone Cold Steve Austin, even Ricky Morton, they sell like they're about to die. They gain the sympathy of the crowd. That's the nature of a babyface. A heel, he cheats. That's his nature. That's what makes people like Ric Flair the greatest heel ever in professional wrestling, because he cheats a lot. And Bianca is getting the selling part down to a T. She was selling throughout this match. It was a lot of near falls, a lot of false finishes, and finally she hits it with a KOD, and Bianca Belair is your new Raw Women's Champion. Now, I said yesterday that I think they're going to move Becky Lynch to SmackDown. You know what I mean? Because Becky Lynch is well known. She's the first woman ever to main event at WrestleMania. She was, before she was pregnant, she was featured on the WWE video game. She's a well-known crossover superstar. I think they're going to move her to SmackDown and have Bianca Belair, after they do the series of rematches like at WrestleMania Backlash, they'll move her to SmackDown, which I consider is the A show. Raw used to be the A show in the original brand split, but now I think SmackDown is the A show ever since 2019. So I think they're going to move her to there, just because there's a lot to do with her and Charlotte. Well, moving on. The Logan Paul Miz match. Again, Dominic Mysterio and Rey Mysterio, they have certain chemistry. They're father and son. And I think the joke is that Rey Mysterio is actually shorter and looks more immature than his own son. You know, you know, Dominic looks more like an adult than Ray, and Ray's the dad. You know what I mean? So I guess that's the joke of the Mysterios, right? Mysterio father and son duo. But again, I didn't really like them, but I did like the chemistry between Miz and Logan Paul. And by the way, Logan Paul impressed me, just like Bad Bunny last year. Maybe it's being in matches with the Miz. Just like Bad Bunny last year, people went in, and this time even me, I vouched for Bad Bunny last year, but this time even me, I'm like, Logan Paul, he did nothing last year. He just sat there, right? But in the Sami Zayn Kevin Owens match, and he's gonna do nothing this year. This year he's in a match, he's gonna do shit. But he hits Rey Mysterio with the most beautiful three amigos that I've ever seen since since Eddie Guerrero, the late Eddie Guerrero, rest in peace, was alive. You know what I mean? And then he hits him with a frog splash, and the crowd goes crazy because, of course, Eddie Guerrero, Texas native. This is Texas. We're in Texas, WrestleMania, Arlington. Close to El Paso, close to Eddie Guerrero's home territory. It goes electric. And Logan Paul really shows that maybe he does. Maybe he can prove the haters wrong, and he does have a future in the WWE from going forward. And him and Miz had matching outfits, which I really liked. The black and yellow matching outfits. It made them look like a real tag team. But at the end of it, the Miz turns on Logan Paul, hits him with a skull-crushing finale, and he is done. So maybe now the Miz and Logan Paul will have a feud going on. And maybe they could involve Jake Paul, his brother, who is the more famous of the duo, in it as well. Okay, now we get to the Seth Rollins match. Now, the Seth Rollins match, I didn't put it in my preview video because I'm like, I thought WWE was going to do a swerve. I know people were saying that it was going to be Cody Rhodes. I know people were saying that this has to be Cody Rhodes. It was leaked. But you know how WWE is. They'll leak something and then it'll come out later that it really wasn't that. You know what I mean? So I really didn't trust it. They did the promo package where he goes to Stamford, Connecticut, and he's on Vince McMahon's desk, and he's telling him, who's my WrestleMania opponent? So Seth Rollins, Seth Rollins comes out. Seth freaking Rollins comes out, and he is in this outfit that he looks like he borrowed it from Becky Lynch's closet. You know what I mean? Like he looks like he said, "Okay, Becky, Becky, my gear is not clean, or it's in the dryer, or in the washer, right? I need something to wear out there tonight for WrestleMania." And she was like, "Okay, Seth, wear one of my old robes, right?" You know what I mean? I can't do an Irish accent, but it's close enough. You know what I mean? Like, so he comes out in like a woman's bathrobe and shit like, and he's like, "Who is it? Who is it? Stop wasting time. Stop wasting the people's time." And all of a sudden the lights go out. And when the lights went out, I'm like, "Oh my God, they just swerved us. It's not Cody Rhodes, it's the fucking Undertaker." I'm not like, like, I'm like, he just went into the Hall of Fame. He's stepping out of retirement already, and they're going to wrestle Seth Rollins. They swerved everybody. But no, Cody Rhodes, music hits, the American Nightmare music. Now, keep in mind, I don't really watch AEW, so I never heard this song, this Cody Rhodes song, which I am absolutely in love with now. Since last night, I played it like 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Like just the lyrics that perfectly describe Cody's journey from, as Pat McAfee said, from undesirable to undeniable. The prodigal son has returned. The baby boy, if you will, of Dusty Rhodes, came back. The American Nightmare, Cody Rhodes, decked out in red, white, and blue, looking like Sting. He looked like Sting at the 1990 Great American Bash, and it was incredible, man. I saw, for the first time ever, a star in Cody Rhodes. I watched Cody Rhodes when he first debuted in 2009. When he came into the company and he was with Legacy, and then he was dashing Cody Rhodes, and then he was with the Rhodes Scholars, and then he did the Stardust thing, and then his dad died in 2015, and I said even then, why don't you stop the Stardust thing and just make Cody Cody? You know what I mean? Cody never found his place, in the scheme of things, until he went to New Japan. He went to Ring of Honor. He became champion there. And he finally returned. A lot of AEW hardcores, AEW marks, they are upset because they say, "Oh, Cody's a sellout." He talked so much about the revolution when AEW first started. And now look at him taking all the money to go back to the big leagues. But you guys got to think. I remember when his dad did a roundtable, Legends of the Roundtable, one year on WrestleMania, and he said that his dream was for his son, his baby boy, Cody Rhodes, to main event the WrestleMania, and he's finally done that. In my eyes, it wasn't a main event, but it was a heavily hyped show, and the match, man. Again, I don't watch New Japan. I didn't really watch Ring of Honor. I don't watch AEW. I watch only the WWE, and that's only sporadically. So I hadn't really seen how Cody grew. I feel like Cody left as a boy in the world of professional wrestling, and he returned as a man yesterday. He grew into such a tremendous star. The way he was selling, the drama that he was selling, the moves he was doing. Like, On the real, when Cody's matches used to come on in WWE back when he was there in the 2000s, I, 2010s, that era, I used to be like, oh man, Cody Rhodes, click, change the channel, do something else, you know, watch whatever going on Facebook or pay attention to something else. Cody Rhodes was not somebody that kept my attention. But last night, between the entrance and the moves they did, especially Seth Rollins, he did this inverted superplex on Cody. And I'm like, oh my God, what? Cody, and then the drama of, Cody just selling. He does the flip flop and fly like his dad, the bionic elbow, baby. Right? And he looks up to the sky, with his dad, obviously, in heaven. And he finally finishes off, Seth Rollins with 3 finishers. And Seth Rollins gave him a hell of a match as well. Congratulations to Cody Rhodes. Welcome back home. Welcome back home. You know what I mean? Where you belong. You're a star. You don't belong in AEW. But I just wonder what Tony Khan is thinking in the back in AEW. I said on one of my groups yesterday, I said, I guess he drank a whole case of White Claw last night because Tony Khan, this is bigger than CM Punk's return. I'm sorry, CM Punk was gone for 7 years. Cody, from all of wrestling, well, not really, because he was in backstage. That show that Renee Paquette was doing. But he was gone for 7 years, basically. Cody was gone for 6 from the WWE. But Cody's shit was so much better. The pop he got, man, it was magical, man. Like, and then that song, I can't get it out of my head. The character, the gimmick, it reminded me, like I said, of Sting's energy. I see Cody. I see this version of Cody Rhodes coming back as the American Nightmare to become the WWE champion eventually in the future. That's how much he impressed me. So that's what I took away. And then, okay, the main event, Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey. Well, this really wasn't the main event, but this was the main event because what happened next we didn't know about. And what happened next, okay, this main event, let me say this. Every time we talk about a WrestleMania, there are certain WrestleManias where what is the main event officially dies or doesn't, get that much recognition, or the fans are already tired because they've seen something so much better that by the time we get to the main event, they're like either leaving or they're quiet or they're going up to get snacks or they just don't care about this main event just because the placing of the card. An example of this is like WrestleMania 18. Triple H versus Chris Jericho was the main event, but Hulk Hogan coming back to the WWE, wrestling The Rock, was so much better and took the energy, zapped that complete energy out of the crowd that by the time it got around to Triple H and Chris Jericho, nobody cared. Same thing with WrestleMania 25. Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, probably one of the best matches ever, and that took the energy out of the crowd. And by the time we got around to Triple H versus Randy Orton for the WWE Championship, nobody cared. People were completely tired. Same thing with WrestleMania 28, 10 years ago. Well, that was a little bit different because, you put it at the main event, right? The Rock's return against John Cena, but still the title match, which was Chris Jericho versus CM Punk, Nobody cared about that. The crowd was completely dead. And at WrestleMania 29, it was the same thing. And I know that personally because I was in attendance that night. That night, when CM Punk fought The Undertaker, that match was so good that by the time we got around to John Cena versus The Rock Part 2, second time around, nobody cared. Well, that was this with this night. Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair was hyped up as the main event for night one. But the Cody Rhodes thing and the Bianca Belair match, especially the Cody Rhodes thing, Cody Rhodes match, Cody Rhodes Seth Rollins, was so great that fans were just completely tired. They really weren't into what Charlotte Flair and Ronda were doing. I mean, Charlotte, she was laying it into Ronda. She was chopping her. She chopped her so much that her whole chest turned red, right? And you could kind of see her bleeding hard way from her chest, right? But it still wasn't, it still didn't live up to par necessarily, you know, as it could have. It was one of those. It was one of those nights. Even hell, even WrestleMania 8 was that. If you go back to WrestleMania 8, yeah, the main event was Hulk Hogan versus Sid, but Ric Flair versus Randy Savage and Roddy Piper versus Bret Hart was so good, nobody cared about Hulk Hogan versus Sid. So that was this. The main event fell flat, and the ending was bullshit. Charlotte Flair walks away with the championship, even though Ronda was the one that came back, and Ronda had her beat. You know, Ronda had the armbar on. Charlotte was tapping. Charles Robinson, the referee, Little Nate, he was knocked out. And then another time, Ronda had her pinned, and Charlotte. They said that Charlotte had her foot on the rope. She didn't. Ronda had her beat then. So Ronda basically gets screwed, and she doesn't know how to sell it. I heard somebody say in the back that she had an altercation with Bruce Pritchard or one of her producers, right? Who knows if that's the case? But she loses. And again, what happened after that match, that wasn't the main event, right? The real main event was an impromptu match. In this match, the crowd was tired because of the Cody thing and because of Bianca Belair, but they woke up for this. And this was another return. The return for the first time since 2003 of Stone Cold Steve Austin to wrestling in his home state of Texas against Kevin Owens. We thought it was just going to be some KO show, right? Some segments like he did the Piper's Pit segment at WrestleMania 21 or at WrestleMania 5, right? But no, it wasn't that. It was a whole match. Stone Cold Steve Austin actually wrestled against Kevin Owens. Kevin Owens bumping like a boss for one of his idols, and Stone Cold Steve Austin wins. It's basically Stone Cold Steve Austin's swan song. So again, just like 2002, 2022 is going to be a decade of saying highs and saying byes, because we're not only saying hi again to Cody Rhodes, right? He's come back, and it's like with Hulk Hogan. Him and Ronda are like Hulk Hogan and Triple H of this era. Yeah, Ronda came back after 3 years, just like Triple H came back after a couple of months, and her return was triumphant. But Cody's return was Cody's return, just like Hulk Hogan's return was his return, overshadowing that of Triple H, both in the match and his return. So, and in an era of saying, goodbye, because we not only said goodbye to Stone Cold Steve Austin last night, but we said goodbye to and congratulations to him, Undertaker. We love you, and we appreciate your years and years of loyalty and entertainment over the decades. To the Undertaker, they did the Hall of Fame induction The Hall of Famees. Congratulations to all of them. Steiner brothers watched them for years and years in Jim Croc Promotions in the NWA. And, when they came to WWE in 1993, they didn't have a great run. They held the tag team championships and they wrestled two good matches, WrestleMania 9 and SummerSlam 93, respectively, against the Head Shrinkers and the Heavenly Bodies. And of course, when Scott Steiner came in as a solo in 2003, he didn't do great. He was the star in WCW. He turns heel in 1998, and then towards the early 2000s, the latter half of WCW, him, Booker T, and Jeff Jarrett become the faces of the new WCW. And he was huge in WCW. When he came to WWE, he and Triple H had some politics going on. And their match at Royal Rumble 2003 was shit. And he never takes off. And from there, he had some problems, with Hulk Hogan. He had some problems with Triple H. He had some problems with a lot of guys backstage. And people didn't know if he and his brother would ever get into the Hall of Fame, but thankfully they did. Rick Steiner now working as a school teacher in the Cherokee County School District in Georgia. And his son, Ron Baker, who I see a future for Ron Baker, coming to the main roster. He's no longer the NXT champion right now, so he's probably going to transition to the main roster. So it was an era of saying goodbyes to the Steiner brothers and saying goodbye to The Undertaker. His Hall of Fame speech, incredible. It went on for like 2 hours. He showed us all his iterations, all his costumes, the purple one, the Dark Side Undertaker, the Ministry Undertaker, all his costumes. But at WrestleMania last night, he comes out, they have, the lights go out. He is the biggest star, the biggest, not star, but the biggest character that WWE has ever produced. He was loyal to the WWE when other guys went to WCW, and he stayed there. He stayed behind, and he fought as a loyal soldier for Vince McMahon in WCW, so he deserves it. Thank you, Undertaker. He's probably the only wrestler that is still around from the time I started watching way back in 1993. You know what I mean? So, seen his whole career play out. But, and of course, Stone Cold Steve Austin, his swan song. He was inducted in 2009, another Texas WrestleMania, WrestleMania 25. He had his biggest match at WrestleMania 17, where he beat The Rock for the second time to become the WWF champion. He turns heel. People didn't like that, but it was nice to see Stone Cold Steve Austin put a cherry on top of his career, because for years people said, oh, Stone Cold's going to come back. He's going to wrestle Brock Lesnar. He's going to wrestle CM Punk. It never happened, but we finally got a chance to say goodbye to the legend that is Stone Cold Steve Austin, the man who saved the WWE. When he became a star in 1996, then 1997, it was him who pulled the ship up. He pulled the Titanic up, and WWE was able to defeat WCW. So it was a Texas-size goodbye to the toughest SOB in the WWE. And I thought it was interesting, too, that he started his career with facing off against an anti-American Canadian, and he ended his career facing off against an anti-American Canadian. Remember, Bret Hart was the anti-American Canadian in WrestleMania 13, and Stone Cold Steve Austin, blood from a stone, he passes out, all that blood in that submission match. That's what made him a legend. And he ends it with wrestling Kevin Owens, another anti-American Canadian asshole. You know. So that is that. Thank you to Undertaker. Thank you to Stone Cold. And I look forward to the future of Cody Rhodes being a legend. And also, let's not forget, Cody Rhodes, and speaking about Texas, Cody Rhodes, born in Atlanta, Georgia, but is the son of a son of a plumber from Austin, Texas. So in a way, he's kind of a Texas boy too, or at least his father was. And like Pat McAfee said, Dusty is looking down on him right now from heaven and thinking, "Damn, my boy done made me proud." You know, and he had the tattoo. He had the American Nightmare tattoo. People saying, "Oh, he's gonna cover it up." He didn't. As far as the other Hall of Fame nominees, Vader, his son was there accepting um, the award on his behalf. Shad Gaspard got the Ultimate Warrior Award, well deserved. Shad Gaspard's story is always very tragic, as you guys recall. In 2020, he passed away. He drowned trying to save his son. Really tragic stuff. Both he and the son, passed away. Former member of Crime Time, so that was tragic. And of course, Vader's situation was tragic as well. I don't know. Nikki Bella got some false information. She said that she couldn't wait to hear Vader's Hall of Fame speech. Hello, Vader's been dead for several years. I don't know, where she got that from, but oh well. But it seemed like in the night when it came to nostalgia, it was a night to honor legends of 1997 because Vader was there, Taker was there, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Vader's I wasn't there. Excuse me, I'm not Nikki Bella. I know Vader has passed away, but Vader's memory was there, and Vader was a part of the storylines in 1997. Although um, he didn't wrestle the Undertaker as he was supposed to. He wrestled Owen Hart and British Bulldog in a tag team match, but he was still part of the storylines in '97. So it was incredible, man. And that was only night one. Night two tonight will feature Sasha Banks and Naomi, formerly Team Bad, going against Shayna Baszler, Natalia, Liv Morgan, and Rhea Ripley for the Women's Tag Team Championships. I hate when they do this. They stack in mad opponents just to get everybody on the card. If you're going to have a women's tag team match, and finally, please, WWE, have Sasha Banks win something. You know what I mean? Because she put over Bianca Belair last year. She's lost in every single WrestleMania she's ever been in. She has the reverse Undertaker WrestleMania record. She's not 21-0. She's like 0-15. Like at least give her this. You know what I mean? Tag team, women's tag team gold. It's not with Bayley, of course, her partner and bestie. You know what I mean? It's with Naomi, and that's who she basically on camera when she came to the main roster. That's who she started with. You know what I mean? And it was her idea, her and Bayley's idea to come up with the women's tag team division. At least give her this. You know what I mean? I don't know what they're going to do with that. Pat McAfee is wrestling Austin Theory. I look for Vince McMahon somehow to get involved because, of course, Vince is tied in. Vince did that candid interview with Pat McAfee. There's, a bunch of kayfabe rumors that Pat McAfee is, kayfabe competition with Vince McMahon somehow. So look for Vince to be involved. I don't know how, but somehow in that match. Also, Omos is going to take on Bobby Lashley. And like I said yesterday with this, how the Almighty have fallen. Bobby Lashley last year, just like Sasha and Bianca Belair, made history, Black history, walked into WrestleMania as the WWE champion, and he walked out of WrestleMania as the WWE champion, defeating Drew McIntyre. Well, this year he's wrestling Omos. Is sort of like somebody said, Black Hulk Hogan versus Black Andre the Giant. Sort of like a David and Goliath type storyline. Anyway, almost sucks. You know what I mean? So That'll be a match I'll skip. Edge versus AJ Styles. Now, there is a match, Edge and AJ Styles, that I am looking forward to. Edge, after the beatdown of AJ Styles a couple weeks ago on Raw, he has tremendous heat, and there is rumors that he's going to start his own heel faction. I don't know how true that is. You know what I mean? But we'll gotta see. Edge usually blows it away. He blew it away last year in the main event against Roman Reigns. He blew it away the year before. Even though the match, WrestleMania 36 with Randy Orton dragged on a bit, he blew it away there. But um, and also you have the New Day's match. He really cares about the New Day and what they're doing. People are like, "Oh, the New Day's match is canceled." I don't really care. I'm past the New Day already. Get well, Big E, but Big E's not there, so and he's my favorite New Day member. So you know, I don't really care. Um, okay, for the men's Raw Tag Team Championship, Um, Sheamus is taking on the Street Profits. So I predict the Street Profits to win. I'm not really paying attention to that one either. Um, I don't know. Maybe the Street Profits might win. Maybe Alpha Academy might win. Otis and Chad Gable deserve something. Also really screwed Otis. You would have thought 2 years ago that the Otis Mandy Rose storyline would go somewhere and Otis would be something big. It didn't happen. You know, you know what I mean. So maybe they might win. As far as the Universal Championship, the Universal Champion Roman Reigns, head of the table, the Tribal Chief, versus Big Dog. I was looking for you, man. Cody Rhodes, man. What did you think? The return that blew me away, bro. That I marked out, man. So I couldn't, man. I don't really watch AEW like that. I said that in the beginning of the video. I don't really watch AEW. So I never got a chance to really see this version of Cody Rhodes. To me, Cody Rhodes was like some Stardust shit or some Dashing Cody or some Rhodes Scholars, what he was, um, you know, when he left. So, in my opinion, this is the first time really seeing that presentation, that American Nightmare version on screen. And I think the way that WWE presented it, it made it look big time. You know what I mean? I know what you're going to say, Big Dog, that like what a lot of people are saying, what is Cody headed for, the 24/7 championship? But I think it was an ultimate power play by Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon said, okay, you've gotten all these guys. Luke Harper jumped. Dean Ambrose jumped. Punk, Bryan, all these guys have jumped to AEW. But I'll checkmate you and I'll take the biggest guy that you've got, the guy who was behind your so-called revolution. And I will, checkmate. Vince McMahon basically told Tony Khan, I sunk your battleship, bro. Like, you've tried everything. Or like when you play Uno and the guy pulls out a draw 4 card with all the colors. Vince has defeated Tony Khan in the war. Who can Tony get that's going to top what they did last night with Cody? He's not going to get Cena. He's not going to get Roman Reigns. He's not going to get Brock. Last year they had Punk, and I gave AEW. I don't watch AEW, but I watched the night that Punk returned, and I gave AEW all the credit. I said it was incredible when Punk returned. But this top Punk shit, this top CM Punk, this what they put on with CM Punk could not compete with what the return that WWE put on for Cody Rhodes. You know, like Tony Khan had to just be like, you know what, I'm done. You know, like I can't compete with that. You know, like game over. Like that was a fatality. You know, it was like some Mortal Kombat shit. Finish him. And Vince was just like, you know. Yeah, like it made the entire promotion and every debut they've ever done. You know, from Luke Harper to John Moxley to Punk, Bryan, Adam Cole. It made every jump that they've ever done in AEW from WWE to AEW look second rate. And there is going to be in the future nobody, I don't think. Now, if I'm wrong, and in the future John Cena shows up on Dynamite and they present John Cena like a boss or Brock or Roman Reigns, I'll say it. I'll be the first to admit, you know what? I'm on record. Everything is here is recorded. There's all archives here. I'll be the first to say I was wrong and AEW just topped WWE. You know what I mean? But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's anybody on WWE's roster that that AEW could get the jump, even despite the money, that could top what WWE did last night. Vince was brilliant, and the way he played it, and the intricacies, the details. Even Vince Russo, who takes credit for the Attitude Era, will tell you in interviews that Vince McMahon is a guy for details. Vince is all about the details. And the details of this Seth Rollins Cody Rhodes match were so intricate because it was at that time when Cody left, who was the mentor? I mean, who was Seth Rollins the mentor to? He was the mentor to Triple H, right? And Triple H was the guy that Cody Rhodes basically, one of the guys that forced Cody Rhodes out of the WWE in 2016. So every little piece was put together so intricately. Back when Cody left, they were marketing Seth as the future of the WWE. And then when Seth in the match says, "Welcome to the big leagues, bitch," you know, taunting Cody, making it so that Cody could come back. As long as WWE is fine in the way they're marketing Cody right now, just keep Brandy off television. That's all WWE has to do. Keep Brandy off TV. You know what I mean? Keep Brandy off TV. As long as they keep Brandy off TV and keep marketing Cody the way they're marketing him, this is going to be a tremendous run for Cody. And think how poetic a lot of things in WWE often are. Think how this kind of reminded me of 2010, WrestleMania 26. How poetic it was that Bret Hart comes back and Shawn Michaels leaves. How poetic is it now that Cody comes back and Triple H has left? Yeah. You know, the shit was so poetic, and it goes to show you how much of a master storyteller Vince McMahon is. What Tony Khan would have done, Big Dog, and you know this too, what Tony Khan would have done if the roles were reversed, he would have announced that Cody was coming back the week before, and it wouldn't have been as big as a surprise, and he would have blew his load, and it would have been like, okay, yeah, we knew Cody was coming, and he would come out and he would lose. That's what Tony Khan would have done. That goes to show you how amateur Tony Khan is. He would have talked about it weeks and weeks leading up to it, and gave the surprise away before Cody even debuted. If the roles were reversed, that's a Tony Khan move. But a Vince McMahon move is let him wait. You know, don't tell him. Let him wait. Even me buying ROH, even even Tony Khan buying ROH, he handled that wrong. He botched that. Look how he came out there like a complete mark. Telling everybody, very awkwardly that he's just bought Ring of Honor. No video packages showing who the Ring of Honor guys are. Tony always does that. He always blows his load too early, and that's what really is the market difference. The difference is not money. Of course, Shad Khan, his dad, has way more money than Vince McMahon. Owns the Jacksonville Jaguars on the UK soccer team, right? But the difference is never been about money. It's that Vince McMahon is such a brilliant genius, and the wrestling business is so ingrained in Vince, and it's Vince's own money. It's not Vince's father's money. It's not Ted Turner's money. It's his own money. And those that know better than Vince don't have enough money, like Cornette or Heyman. And those that have enough money don't know better than Vince, like Tony Khan and Ted Turner. So unfortunately, that's why they'll never be another WWE, because it's the right combination of knowledge of the wrestling business and the finances to produce a great show. And you have to have both. You have to have entertainment. My favorite moment on night one, Cody's match. The match I didn't even really care about, Big Dog, because I didn't have faith that WWE would actually do it. I really thought they were gonna do a swerve and it was gonna be Shane. I'm like, oh shit, Shane's gonna come out and maybe this is a work with Cody and AEW to keep him off AEW TV. So when he comes back, yeah, that was a big one. Yeah, I was surprised that Stone Cold Steve Austin, but to me, Big Dog, and you might disagree, and you do disagree, and that's fine. But it was great to see Stone Cold Steve Austin back in the ring, sort of. But he wasn't, of course, his health, he's gotten older, and because of his injuries, he wasn't the Stone Cold Steve Austin of old. But at least it wasn't like when Bret Hart came back in the street fight, and you're like, damn, he never should have came back. Or like when Shawn Michaels came back, in that tag match, in 2018. At least or like when Goldberg and Undertaker wrestled at Saudi Arabia. At least it wasn't like that. At least it was better than that. But we waited so long for Stone Cold Steve Austin to come back, and it was a great moment, yes, but it just seemed like he was past his prime. He did his Stone Cold thing, and he tried his best. Oh, the pop for Stone Cold is always going to be amazing. He's Stone Cold Steve Austin. Nobody alive can get a pop the way that Stone Cold Steve Austin can get a pop. That's the true war. Yeah, 57, exactly. That's a Road Warrior pop. That's a true Road Warriors. That's the true what they call the Road Warrior pop. But he knew that was gonna happen. He's in Texas, his home state. He's, um, a legend, a hero in Texas. You know, but shocking that he wrestled a match. I'm glad it just wasn't a segment. But Ronda, okay, Big Dog. What about what about Ronda Rousey versus Charlotte? Man, they had the misfortune of being placed at the absolutely wrong section of the card between Cody's return and Stone Cold Steve Austin's return, and the match with Bianca and um, Becky, and the fact that nobody wanted Charlotte or as um, the Slug Daddy from OTRS Central said on his channel, Charles Flair in in the match. Nobody wanted Charlotte in that match anyway. And then she wins. Like what the hell? Like, that was that was so yeah, it sucked. Like it showed why it really showed why Kurt Angle and Triple H were really good, at what they did. And I say them because the only reason why Ronda's debut was blew everybody away back in 2018 was because of them. Because they made her look good. you know, Without them, her matches fall flat. Yes, she's a great personality. She did a lot for the women's division and all that, but she really needs somebody to carry her in matches. She is kind of lost out there. You know, she's lost out there. And knowing Ronda Rousey, see with her, she has no she has no persistence. You know what I mean? She fails at something and she takes her ball and go home. She did that in the UFC and she did that before in the WWE. So knowing her, we probably won't see her again for a very long time, if ever, because she feels like because she's Ronda Rousey, the WWE needs to roll out the red carpet for her and do everything she wants. You know what I mean? And that is not how it works. Like somebody said in a group I was in last night, they said the good thing about the match is Ronda Rousey isn't the champion. The bad thing in the match is that Charlotte is. You know, and once again, after Cody's return and right between Stone Cold Steve Austin's other return, between the two biggest returns of the night, there was no way that people were going to pay attention to Ronda Rousey versus Charlotte Flair. They were going to go up, get their snacks. They had to get their snacks, go to the bathroom if they had to go to the bathroom, piss break or whatever, because they didn't want to miss Stone Cold Steve Austin, and they were already tired out from Cody's match. So there was no way they were going to win. Either way, they could have bled buckets. It could have been like some Thunder Rosa shit, and still, you know, nobody was gonna care. I don't know where they're going with this. Who's gonna beat Charlotte? And watch Ronda. If Ronda does stick around, watch her beat Charlotte at a freaking like WrestleMania Backlash when it doesn't even matter no more. WWE's fond of doing this. They did this in 2008. Okay, Randy Orton retains, but then months later he gets beaten by Triple H anyway. So what does it matter? He should have just gotten beaten by Triple H right then and there at WrestleMania. You know, you know. Yeah, the nip slip. Uh, who the hell knows? You know, like I'm so sick of Charlotte Flair anyway. The way she sells, and Ronda, she needs to work on her selling. Ronda sells like Zeus. No disrespect to the late Tiny Lister, but when Zeus was a wrestler, he was one of the worst wrestlers of all time and was only there because he was doing a movie with Hulk Hogan. um, that might happen tonight. Yeah, I think that Roman will triumph and he will be the WWE champion and be the hold them the two titles. I hope they don't end a brand split though. Big Dog, do you think they will end the brand split? You know, People say, "Oh, you got AEW now. You don't need the brand split," because they had the brand split when WCW went out of business, and they had the brand split again, like when TNA was on its deathbed. when AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, and Sting, and all those guys jumped, to WWE. That's in 2016. That's when they brought it back. Yes, I think that will happen, and I hope it does, man, because that's the only thing that could top last night. The only thing that could top the returns of last night will be The Rock's return to confront Roman and set up. I mean, it's in Hollywood, and who's the biggest? Uh, okay, yeah, Big Dog says he thinks the brand split should end. I mean, it's in Hollywood. Next year's WrestleMania 39. So, who's the biggest wrestler associated with Hollywood ever? The Rock. Of course, he has Young Rock, but maybe maybe they might have a Will Smith impersonator come out and slap Roman Reigns. A Will Smith impersonator coming out to slap Roman Reigns. Keep keep my wife's name out of your effing mouth. Listen, man. So that probably is going to be the main event for WrestleMania 39, and that's the only thing that could top last night. If they don't do it that way, then nothing that Brock and Roman Reigns could do could top last night. I mean, we've seen it tons of times, and Roman has never beaten Brock. I'm surprised they never mentioned that. They've every time they've wrestled at WrestleMania, Roman has never beat Brock. They wrestled 31. Seth Rollins interfered, cashing his money in the bank. 34, Brock won. And the only two guys to ever have beaten The Undertaker at a WrestleMania. So, you know, we got to see. We got to. Yeah, they have a lot of momentum. The show was great, Big Dog. And I want to say this. Going into this WrestleMania, I wasn't hyped for it. And a lot of times that happens. WrestleMania 31 was an example of that. I wasn't really hyped for WrestleMania 31. It turned out to be a great show. I wasn't really hyped for WrestleMania 13. It turned out to be a great show. And I wasn't really hyped for this one, and it turned out to be, well, a great show and a memorable show. So a lot of times when you're not hyped for it, it turns out to be great. And when they overhype it, like WrestleMania 32, it turns out to be complete shit. You know what I mean? So I was hyped for it, and I'm glad they did the two nights. I'm for the two nights. Obviously 2020, 2020 WrestleMania 36, they had to do it that way because of the pandemic, and they continued the following year, last year, and it allows them to hash out storylines and people not to get overshine. Like, imagine if they did Brock versus Roman last night, and all in one night, Cody's thing would have been overshadowed, or probably would have overshadowed the main event. Yeah, nobody was. Yeah, and we were hyped at that time. At least I was for WrestleMania 11 with the LT shit, and it turned out that it sucked. You know what I mean? So sometimes, um, you can be right, and sometimes you can be wrong. WrestleMania 9. The funny thing about that show is that I love the look of it. You know what I mean? The Roman S thing, but the way it ended, you know, Hulk Hogan winning the WWE Championship when he wasn't even on TV for a whole year. Like seemed anticlimactic. Like what the hell? He comes in at the last minute and he cashes in. Well, he didn't have the money in the bank, but he cashes in his political card and he beats Yokozuna. Like you hype up Yokozuna as this unbelievable beast. He destroys Jim Duggan. He destroys Bret Hart at the contract signing. He destroys Bret Hart basically in the match. Bret got the sharpshooter on him, yeah, but throughout the match, Yokozuna completely dominated. And then the end is Hulk Hogan winning the championship. Like what? You know, like so. Sometimes they can hype a WrestleMania up and it would end up sucking. Sometimes I feel like this one, the build for this one wasn't great. I didn't see people talking a lot about this one, and they knew. Oh yeah, there's a whole series, Big Dog, on my channel about 1990 where I talk about 1993. That was funny too. Luger didn't win the title, but he won the match, and it's like, well, why are they celebrating? And I always thought as a kid too, back then, like this is when I started to feel like wrestling was not real, because I'm like, okay, he knocks Yokozuna out and he lets the referee count him to 10. Why doesn't he? I mean, I know Yokozuna's fat, right? But why doesn't he at least try? If it was a real fight, it was a real competition, he would have at least tried to throw Yokozuna back into the ring. That's what makes logical sense, right? And then, like, they'll both be counted out because he'd be trying to get a Yoko up, trying to shove him back into the ring. That's when I started to realize, wait a minute, this wrestling stuff, they have it all planned out, right? Like he can't be that dumb. Like you know. And then the rest of 1993, Ludwig Borga. It's funny though because if they tried that now with a count out, speaking of that, you know what I thought, Big Dog? I thought that I was like, yo, imagine if Vince has Cody Rhodes lose. For a couple of minutes there in the match, I'm like, man, Cody Rhodes might fucking lose the match. That'd be the worst. It'd be the funniest thing ever. That would be the worst thing since Luger. But yeah, 1993 was a really crazy year in the WWF and in WCW. But with WCW was more the backstage stuff. You know what I mean? Like Sid and Arn Anderson getting to that fight with scissors, and then Sid being cut out of the main event of Starcade. Because of that, and then Ric Flair, it ended up good because Ric Flair won the championship for the 11th time against late Vader. And it was a great match, Starcade 93. But in WWE, the booking was less than great in of all their pay-per-views except for King of the Ring. That was the only one that made sense. Bret Hart, three great matches, Bam Bam Bigelow, Razor Ramon, and Mr. Perfect. And some would say that the babyface match, although not as good, between Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart was right up there with their 1991 SummerSlam match. So, but then it didn't really make any sense because Jerry Lawler, the announcer, comes out and he declares he's the king of wrestling. And people are like, okay, he's the king. But to a WWF fan, he's just the announcer. Nobody watched, in his glory days in the 70s and early 80s, like the Andy Kaufman thing um, in Memphis, really. Not the WWF fans. We don't know him as that. So we're like, who the hell's this jabroni announcer attacking Bret Hart at the end of King of the Ring? And they did a lot of that in 93 where they would introduce, because they're working with USWA, and Smoky Mountain. Yeah, Stu and Helen, that one match on Raw where he just obliterated Stu and Helen. Bret Hart is wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow, and Stu and Helen. This is when they were in the Manhattan Center, and Stu and Helen are in the balcony, and Jerry Lawler is just ripping into them, you know, and he was hilarious. Bobby Heenan too. Survivor Series 1993. Bobby Heenan's last pay per view with the WWE until WrestleMania 17. He got kicked out of the WWE by Gorilla Monsoon the night after, that Raw after. He the Survivor Series match that Bret Hart has with Shawn Michaels is Knights, which again, not knowing the backstory, it didn't make any sense. Why does Shawn Michaels have Knights? You know, but Bobby Heenan's commentary rips into Stu Hart and Helen Hart. It's one of the funniest things besides Royal Rumble 1992 that Bobby Heenan did. But yeah, Jerry Lawler in the 90s, him and Bret Hart kind of became the new Hulk Hogan and Bobby Heenan. The way Hulk Hogan and Bobby Heenan always hated each other no matter where they went. That's kind of like how King and Bret Hart was until Bret Hart turned heel. When Bret Hart turned heel, the night he formed the Hart Foundation, there was such continuity that even Jerry Lawler was like, "Oh, can you believe this, McMahon?" you know. You don't really have that now. You don't really have an announcer who hates or despises a wrestler so much that even if that wrestler turns, that heel announcer will still hate that wrestler. Like you had it with Bobby and Hogan, you had it with Lawler and uh, Bret Hart, and you had the opposite with JR and Stone Cold. JR was tremendously always behind Stone Cold, and then when Stone Cold turned heel, it was like JR took it personally. When Stone Cold turned heel, you were like, oh, well, how's JR going to take it? You were thinking in your mind, kayfabe wise. You don't have that now. You had it for a while with The Miz. The Michael Cole being in love with The Miz. And hating Daniel Bryan. Remember when they won the original NXT in 2010 and Michael Cole was a heel? And that lasted up until when Jerry Lawler had his heart attack, and then Cole went back to being Cole. But you don't have that now. And you had it for a while with Corey Graves and Sasha. Corey Graves was always ripping on Sasha no matter what. Even when she came back, she was a supposed babyface and she turns on Natalia, he's still ripping, on her. But Pat McAfee needs to find that adversary. Either an adversary like Heenan and Hogan or Lawler and Hart, or somebody that he really likes, like with Jesse Ventura and Rick Rude. When Rick Rude would come out, Jesse Ventura would always remind people that Rick Rude won the Jesse the Body Award. And he would basically worship Rick Rude. Same thing with Bobby Heenan and Flair. No matter what side Flair was on, even in WCW, Bobby Heenan would always give the woo. Bobby Heenan would always give props to Flair. And there was continuity. Because one thing that wrestling promotion should be aware of is that wrestling fans, just like any other type of fandom, like Star Wars and everything, we pay attention to details. You know what I mean? So, like Bash the Beast 96, people often say, well, Bobby Heenan ruined it when he said, well, whose side is he on? Not really, because if you ever watched anything Bobby Heenan had ever done in WWE, or even if you went further back in AWA, he always hated Hogan. So Bobby Heenan would always say shit like that about Hogan. He would always say well, whose side is he on, basically? Or he would always say that Hulk Hogan was an ingrate. Hulk Hogan was a horrible person. Hulk Hogan was a scumbag. As a matter of fact, when Hogan turned, what did Heenan say? Heenan said, "What have I been saying all these years? What have I been saying all these years?" It was continuity, and that is a key to a storyline. If a great storyline, right? Exactly. Yeah, but whose side is he? Because you were a long time wrestling fan, Big Dog. A lot of these people looking at it now, they don't. They came in later, or they started watching later. You know, started watching after the NWO or during the Attitude Era. Or they were WCW fans, and they don't really remember. Because remember, WCW fans and WWE fans were two different fan bases, just like with AEW now. You got people like me that don't really watch AEW. So to me, the American Nightmare shit, that's new to me. You know what I mean? Like people that watch both and people that are devoted to both or people that are AEW marks, that might not be new to them because they've seen that entrance before. Me, I just mainly watch WWE and I'm mainly a WWE fan. So when I see that, I never heard the song before. I never saw the entrance before. To me, Cody Rhodes is Stardust or Cody Rhodes is Dashing. And the shit I remember him from when he was with WWE. So that's new to me. So that was similar there, where you had WCW people that never really watched the WWE and didn't pay attention to how Heenan was always against Hogan. Because remember, in WCW, he really wasn't. WCW cut the legs out from under Bobby Heenan. They didn't allow Bobby Heenan to be Bobby Heenan. You know, be the insulting color commentator that he was in WWE, and that's why he wasn't successful. One of the few times he was successful was when he actually turned heel and sympathized with the NWO when the NWO took over Monday Nitro the night before Starrcade '97 because he was back to being a heel. You know what I mean? So he hated it because they said he couldn't say those offensive jokes, but the offensive jokes make Bobby Heenan Bobby Heenan. Without the offensive jokes, he's not Bobby Heenan anymore. They wanted Bobby Heenan, but they wanted to tone down Bobby Heenan, and that was not successful. That was not good. You know, you know. What I mean? So you had to have that kind of continuity for long-time fans. But not every fan watches every single promotion. Some fans just watch. The only thing they watch is, um, AEW, or the only thing they watch is the WWE. So they might not be familiar, or WCW and WWF back in the day. They might not be familiar with certain characters that are native, if you will, to that particular brand or that particular company. Like, I guarantee in the 80s, a lot of wrestling fans that were WWF fans would not have been impressed with the Four Horsemen had they seen them, on WWF because they'd be like, who the hell's these guys? Holding up four fingers, who the hell's JJ Dillon? And I was, yeah, I saw that, Big Dog. Yeah, Taker is the guy. Taker's another guy. Over the years, you can follow his progression. He was the Andre the Giant after Andre the Giant. He was the guy who didn't need the championship. People say Undertaker never had a true run with the championship. His best year was probably 2007, right? When he wins the Royal Rumble and he has that match with Batista. But he was like Andre. He didn't need the belt. But see, he was even better than Andre because number one, he was a better wrestler. I didn't see Andre in the '70s, so people would say, "Oh, well, Andre in the '70s was much better." But when I started to see him in the '80s, he wasn't that great. And also, the difference was Taker stood with one company. Andre the Giant, the reason why he never got old to the WWE fans slash New York territory fans was because he moved around to a lot of different. He went to all the different territories, and he would wrestle there for a while. And Vince Senior would loan him out. It wasn't like that with Taker. Taker grew up in a different era, an era where there was really only two companies, and he stood loyal to the WWE. So being as though he didn't move around as much, Taker, WWE had to make up for that by changing his image a lot, and he had to try on different versions of himself. My favorite version, of course, the original Undertaker, the Gray Undertaker. That to me was the true Undertaker. And every version of the Dead Man. I never liked American Badass. I've talked about it before. I felt like taking Batman out of if you just made a movie, about Batman, just about Bruce Wayne, that's gonna suck, man. What makes Bruce Wayne great is his Batman alter ego. So just trying to humanize the Undertaker and make him a biker and stuff. I know that's what he's into. He's into MMA. He's into, you know, rock music and bikes, and he's a juggalo apparently at heart. You know, but other than the music, American badass music and the rolling music, what really made Undertaker was being the dead man. So I never liked really American badass. I felt like yeah. And then the worst thing they did with him, and funny, Bruce Pritchard still defends this, is the shit with Sarah. Like, okay, the Undertaker, like, could you imagine? Okay, big dog, you were a kid, um, 8, 9, 10, 11, and you watched the WWE as a little kid, and then you stopped watching, and then one of your friends was like, okay, the Undertaker is coming out with his wife, and it's the same reaction Dustin Hoffman had, when he found out Peter Pan has kids. What, the Undertaker has a wife? Like, how does that even make sense? Oh, the Undertaker has a wife. Undertaker's wife Sarah. Like, like what? you know, the Undertaker doesn't have a wife. Like, no, like, you know, no. Yes, Mark Calloway, the man who plays the Undertaker, has a wife or had a wife, but the Undertaker, the character, doesn't have a wife. you know, like, no, no. The idea that it was meta that the Undertaker is now a human being, he's humanized. No, that come on, that doesn't make sense. Like, that's the one character that should have always remained kayfabe. I know why they tried to do it, but they already had an Attitude Era version of the Undertaker with the Ministry Undertaker. Okay, have him have a dark edge, but he's still mysterious. He's not humanized. Like, I never got that. You know, some people did, but again, it was when you started watching. So it's just like with Star Wars, you'll people that watch the originals will say the originals are the best. People that are attached to the prequels will say the prequels are the best. I don't know about the best, but they'll appreciate the prequels a lot more than you know people who only watch the originals because it depends when you got in. You know, so right. But that one night, I gotta disagree with you on that though, Big Dog, because that one night I was there. Madison Square Garden when he turned what came WrestleMania 20. Okay, That night was incredible. That was like, okay, yes, finally Undertaker is back to Undertaker. But I get what you're saying that the effects were lost. And that even when he came back, he wasn't the Undertaker anymore. He didn't have the urn. He didn't have the mystery. He didn't have the mystique. He was kind of there was a mystique lost to him. You know what I mean? So I get what you're. I get your point, but just that one night, and I'm, I hope that WWE is not doing that with Cody Rhodes. I hope it's not just a one night thing, and after that, flatline, because that's how kind of it felt with the Undertaker when he came back in '04. It was like, okay, he's back as the dead man, but it took many years for him to really get that momentum going, and he never really got it back that he had in his early days. You know, because he was already humanized, like Big Dog says. The Dead Man character was the best character that WWE has ever created. And just like with Kamala, or just like with these old school characters, what made it good was that you believed that the person was that. You know, you believed it was real. And of course, being the educational level of wrestling fans today, and that there's no more kayfabe, you can't do characters anymore, really like a Kamala or an Undertaker or George Animal Steel, because fans are not going to buy into it. But what you can do is a newer version of that, like a Cody Rhodes. You actually believe, because part of it is true, that Cody Rhodes was shafted by the WWE, that he was pushed aside by the WWE, that he was screwed by the WWE, and that he's finally come back to basically get his revenge on all of the other WWE superstars. There's still some level that you can buy into certain shit. You know what I mean? But as far as buying into The Undertaker and buying into things like that, no. Not even the kids buy into that anymore, because MMA has come onto the scene and wrestling has been exposed. People say, oh, it's not the same thing because there was always boxing, right? And there was always wrestling, and they existed side by side. Yes, that's true. But MMA takes a lot. MMA takes a lot more from professional wrestling, the way they market gimmicks and stuff. And look at things that are not even combat sports related, like the Oscar shit. It's funny how kayfabe has died for the fan of wrestling, but kayfabe exists in other arenas, like the Oscars. So many people are buying into this shit, and wrestling fans are seeing right through it. To like, yeah, this shit was a freaking work. You know what I mean? Like, you can clearly see the shit was a work. You know? So reality has become a work, and wrestling has become a shoot. Strange world we're living in. Big Dog says I was recently watching a segment from 1991 where Taker stuff. Oh yes, I remember that. Taker and Jake Snake Roberts were tag team partners, and Jake, I almost said Drake. Jake tricked the Warrior, and he got him to get stuffed in a casket. And he's like, never trust a snake. And that's when Jake turned heel. That was incredible, man. Warrior, he was good in small doses. At the time, you know, when I was younger and I started watching, he was my favorite wrestler because this was before Taker. This was 1990. And um, Wrestlemania. Taker debuted later that November. But there was nobody like Warrior that was supernatural. Yeah, Hogan, kids liked Hogan, but I always felt like Hogan was a little hokey, corny-ish. You know what I mean? Like all of his matches were all based on the Rocky movies. He would get beat up by some foreign villain or some fat guy, or some overcoming the odds, and he would all of a sudden overcome the odds, and then he would win. But Ultimate Warrior felt like a real life superhero, like a comic book come to life, and it was that supernatural element. But he was good in small doses because when you saw a lot of the Ultimate Warrior, you're like, okay, he can only do but so much, you know, what I mean? And you gotta work around him. I think a female version of the Ultimate Warrior, and I hate to say it, is um, Ronda Rousey. You know what I mean? She's good in small doses, but a lot of Ronda Rousey, you'll get tired of her pretty quickly, and people have to work around her limitations. Bianca Belair is similar. Bianca Belair, yes, she's a great athlete, but I noticed that if she doesn't have a lot of girls doing power moves for her, you know, she's not that good, and she's good in small doses. So Ultimate Warrior was kind of like that. Same thing when he came back in '92. He wasn't the same, and there was conspiracy theories that he wasn't the same person. That it was Kerry Von Erich dressed up in a makeup, and he was good in small doses for a while, but he quickly got tiring again. Same when he came back in '96. Same when he came back in '98 for WCW. Small doses, he was good, but a long run of the Ultimate Warrior, he didn't have the durability, he didn't have the flexibility, he didn't have the in-ring ability, he didn't have the range, you know. So, but yeah, that storyline was good. Yeah, Undertaker was unreal back then because people thought he could not be beat. People how kids back then were like, how is some even going up to 1994? Yeah, he'd been beaten by Hulk Hogan at Tuesday in Texas in '92. He was good in small doses. Again, like he's like Ronda. You know what I mean? If Ronda has the right opponent, somebody for her to bump like a boss, and her limited promo ability and her limited in-ring ability, she's good. But without that, she's not. And I feel like last night she was completely exposed. That was similar. Last night was similar to when her father, I mean, not her father, excuse me. Her and Charlotte was similar to when Charlotte's father um, wrestled the Ultimate Warrior. It was like, yeah, Ric Flair's bumping for him like a boss, but him and Flair don't have the chemistry. You know what I mean? He's not somebody that could work with Ultimate Warrior's limited ability. And plus, with the exception of WrestleMania 7, the match against Randy Savage, if you put Warrior in there for a long time, he got exhausted a lot. Like you see it at WrestleMania 6, where he is tired. Him and Hogan are doing a lot of rest holds. You know what I mean? Because they're already gassed up. Because his ring entrance was so long and elaborate, most of his energy would be zapped immediately when he walked to the ring. So, you needed somebody to work around him. And Randy Savage was the perfect opponent for him. Randy Savage and him had tremendous chemistry on the mic and in the ring. WrestleMania 7, that match, that was another example. Like, the main event was Hogan and Slaughter, but a match before the main event completely stole the show, and nobody really remembers Hogan and Slaughter. They had to bring the blood out in order to, pop an audience, and even then it didn't do it. The best thing they did in the match was done after the match on the Coliseum home video when Slaughter threw the fireball. And they didn't even show that in the original pay-per-view. And plus, the storyline was controversial because real life war and Slaughter is the turncoat sliding with Saddam Hussein. Not a good look for Vince. I'm glad he doesn't go that route because old school Vince, you would you would have seen a Russian villain like if Rusev was still there, you would have seen a Rusev would have main evented WrestleMania last night because of the whole Russia Ukraine thing. That's the old school mentality of Vince. Take a geopolitical event that's happening and let's capitalize on it. Because that's just wrestling mentality. Wrestling, even before Vince, wrestling was doing that in the 50s with the German villains, and in the 60s and 70s with the Russians, the 80s with the Russian villains. The difference was, though, in 1991, we were still in the war, you know? And Vince got in trouble for that twice in his history, not only in 1991, but in 2005 with Muhammad Hassan, right before the 7/7 bombings. He has a group of people dressed like um, Al Qaeda terrorists attacking the Undertaker, and people at UPN were like, "This Muhammad Hassan shit, cut this," you know, right after the 7/7 bombings in London in 2005. Sometimes, you know, I take it Vince is a political junkie and he pays attention to a lot of this shit. So when he sees shit like this on TV, he wants to put it as part of his show. Sometimes people like it, sometimes they don't. By the way, when Charlotte won the championship, retained the championship last night, first thought that came to my mind, big dog, was in my Iron Sheik voice, fucking bullshit. you know? What would the Iron Sheik say? I bet that's another thing. I bet Miro is regretting now that he's in AEW because Vince would have used him. Vince would have used Miro right now very effectively. Because yeah, when he debuted in 2014, we still, that's when we were in the first conflict with Ukraine. Now, I don't know. Now people are paying attention a lot more to the Ukrainian Russian situation than they were back in 2014 when Miro was there. Like almost nobody knew what the hell Vince was talking about, back then when we were trying to overthrow Viktor Poroshenko's government to put Zelensky in like we have him now. You know what I mean? So nobody knew what Vince was talking about back in 2014 with Ukraine and Russia. Some people did, but now people are putting Ukrainian flags on their social media pages and going along with this Ukraine shit. This would be the perfect time for Miro to return, as Rusev. He's not Russian, he's Bulgarian, but Lana was Russian. So. Yeah, so many AEW guys are just being ignored. Well, that's what happens when you have an overbloated roster. Apparently, they never learn from the mistakes of TNA or WCW. They're copying exactly what WCW was doing in 1997, 98, and 99, just bringing in a bunch of guys. And you bring in so many guys that nobody means anything anymore. You know what I mean? Nobody's impactful because too many guys there. You know what I mean? Like, you have tons of guys, and everybody just gets lost in the shuffle. TNA did the same thing. At one point, every time an ex-WWE guy would come in, TNA put the belt on him. So much so that Samoa Joe was blowing up after he had that three-way match with Loki and Christopher Daniels. And People are like, oh, when you gonna put the belt on Samoa Joe? No, sorry, Jeff Jarrett needs another run. Or Kurt Angle or Christian Cage. And it was like, eventually, people like, oh, what about the TNA originals? Oh, who cares about them? Who cares about the AJ Styles, the Christopher Daniels, the low keys? We're just going to ignore them. And by the time they put it on Samoa Joe, it was too late anyway. But one of the things I loved, Big Dog, last night was the reaction of the AEW fan base. The AEW fan base are such hypocrites because even me as a WWE guy, when Cody Rhodes left, I wish him the best. You know what I mean? I knew he would come back as something bigger, when he made a name for himself in other places. AEW marks are like, oh, Cody Rhodes, he's a sellout. Look at that motherfucker. Cody Rhodes, he was nothing more than a mid-card. I thought he was misused by the WWE. I thought WWE didn't know anything about his talents, right? He was one of the best wrestlers that ever lived. He was the savior of pro wrestling in 2017, 2018, right? Now he's a piece of shit. Look at you, man. AEW marks are acting like an old girlfriend. After the guy breaks up with the girl, she'd be like, oh, he wasn't that good in bed anyway. He was shitty, right? He was small. He didn't last long. He was a minute man. But you wasn't saying that when you were all over me. They wasn't saying that when they were all over Cody Rhodes. He was the best thing that ever happened in professional wrestling. He was the most misused wrestler in the history of wrestling, according to AEW Box. And now they've completely turned on him. I had AEW Mark say, oh, he's a sellout. As if the business isn't about anything else other than money. As Gorilla Monsoon once said, he told Bobby Heenan this, if you're not in this business to make money, then you're in the wrong business. Or as Captain Lou Albano once told Kevin Nash, he said, there's only two things that's real in this business, kid, the miles and the money. So if you're not in this business to make money, I don't know what the hell, or any business really, I don't know what the hell you're in it for. Yes, you're in it to have great matches, 5-star matches, but what does 5-star matches, do you really want to be a 5-star match guy that is never a star? Because if a tree falls in an empty forest and nobody hears it, does that tree really fall? I mean, let's be real. You know what I mean? You want to have great matches, but you want people to see them also. Nobody was seeing Cody Rhodes, and all these Japanese wrestlers, when he was in New Japan or when he was in ROH. So now the AEW marks are all upset. They've turned, and look, WWE fans didn't do that with CM Punk. A lot of us, speaking for me specifically, we're like, we're glad to see Punk, do something else with his life. Obviously, his time in WWE is up. Even if Punk were to come back somehow miraculously to WWE, I don't really see a role for Punk in the new WWE, honestly. You know what I mean? So why begrudge him if he could get money someplace else in a retirement home, like AW is, in a reject home, just like TNA was, just like WCW was. AW has AW has become, they will. AW has become the the place where WWE rejects go. I mean, there always has to be that company. In the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, it was Jim Cocker Promotions / NWA / WCW. In the 2000s, it was TNA. Now it's AEW. I mean, but make no mistake about it, these guys that leave and these guys that say they're going to start a revolution, like Cody, like Kurt Angle, like Jeff Jarrett, and like the NWO and stuff, and Hogan, right? They might feed it to y'all that they are doing something. Oh, I'm going against the man. I hate the WWE. I'm against the WWE. I'm going against the grain. I started a new company, be it Jeff Jarrett or Cody or whomever. But in reality, everybody knows that the WWE/the WWF is the standard of professional wrestling, and everybody who's anybody wants to be there. They're only acting like they're only minimizing the WWE's role because they aren't there. It's like I always say, ugly people say looks don't matter because they're ugly, so they want looks to not matter. Poor people say money doesn't matter because they're poor and they don't want to feel bad. So people not in the WWE at that time say the WWE isn't as good, say they hate the WWE, say they're going against the grain for the WWE, against the WWE. But the first chance they get, whether it be Hulk Hogan, whether it be Jeff Jarrett, whether it be Kurt Angle, whether it be Cody Rhodes, they go back to the WWE because even they know that the WWE is the place to be. They're in another place. They're working somewhere else because the WWE doesn't want them at that time, and they want to do something. They want to make a big impact another place, so WWE can notice them again and be like, "Come back," because everybody comes back. See, that's the thing you guys fail to see. If the WWE wants them, they always come back. Randy Savage, it wasn't that he took a stand and he hated WWE, the story that his brother tells, about some battle royal that his father of Legends battle royal in the Continental Airlines Arena that um he wasn't included in, and then Randy Savage took a stand and I'm taking a stand against WWE and I'm never coming back. I'm sure Randy Savage wanted to come back. China wanted to come back. Vince Russo wants to come back. Jim Cornette, I'm not sure. Jim Cornette might be the only guy that really doesn't want to come back. You know what I mean? But everybody that always, they trashed the WWE. John Moxley wants to come back. Deep inside, if WWE would accept John Moxley back in the company, John Moxley would be there. You know what I mean? Like there is Punk wants to come back. Realistically, Punk wants to come back, and if you believe he don't, then fine, you're a mark. You know what I mean? You buy into this false dichotomy, but they all want to come back. You know what I mean? And they all eventually do. Bret Hart, for years, talked shit about the WWE, and people were like, oh, Bret's never coming back. Guess what? Bret came back. Bruno Sammartino talked shit for many years about the company. Guess what? Bruno Sammartino in 2013 came back to the WWE for the Hall of Fame. Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, all these wrestlers all came back. No matter what any wrestler says, the WWE is the standard and the WWE is the place they want to be. It's sort of like when people from other countries talk, and yes, I'm nationalistic, and I'm just gonna outright and say people from other countries talk shit about the United States. But guess what? If given the opportunity, those same individuals would be right here in the United States because it's the place to be. And it's just like that in wrestling when it comes to wrestling. They're in other places and they're talking shit about the WWE because for some reason the WWE doesn't want them. But I'm sure if the WWE wanted them back, they'd be back because the WWE is the standard. Sorry, that's just how it is. You know, there was wrestling wars throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and WWE won. You know, right? Big Dog is saying he's in China, and of course, they say that China is on the ascendancy. Um, Xi Jinping always talks about the Chinese dream, but where did he get that from? Where did Xi Jinping get that phrase Chinese dream from? From the United States. These bitter betties, these communists and these socialists and these other complainers about America, they're just like the AW marks, the TNA marks, and the WCW marks. They bitch and complain like they've got something better, but the something better they've got is a failed ripoff of something that the United States has already done. They're only hating on the United States because they can't be us, because they wish they were us. China copies everything. Yeah, it is a copying culture. It also, you know, acts like they invented it. They copied Buddhism from the Indians. They copied communism from the Europeans. And they act like they came up with something different, creating cynic schools of communism. You know, the Sino-Soviet split or Chinese Mahayana Buddhist versions of their culture. But they hate on the U.S. But everything they do copies the U.S. Same thing with the Europeans. They hate on us because they wish they were us. They don't have the military might. They don't have the cultural influence, right? Because they have no creativity. They have no creativity. One thing about us, and WWE is a part of this, is the United States. Our biggest export is our popular culture. We changed the world with our popular culture. We revolutionized the world with our popular culture. WWE is a global brand, but it's the reason why at the Titan Towers, when you saw that um, little vignette with Seth Rollins, why there's an American flag there. Because the ingenuity that Vince McMahon represents, that's a part of American culture. The risk taking that Vince McMahon embodies and Vince McMahon represents, that's a part of American culture. The entrepreneurship that Vince McMahon represents, that's a part of American culture. You will never see that in WWE. Something like WWE could never exist in another society. Something like Disney could never exist in another society other than American society, which is in itself an extension of British society. You know, because in order to do a culture like that, you need to have originality, you need to have risk taking, you need to have entrepreneurship, and you need to have ingenuity. And that's something that is built into the American culture. Even the outlaw culture of the old West, or the mobsters like Al Capone, and the business culture like a Facebook, a WWE, a Disney, those kind of pioneers. That kind of never say die attitude, that kind of spit in your face rebelliousness, that doesn't exist in East Asia. Those kind of business risk taking, that doesn't exist in East Asia. It used to exist in Europe, but it's been expunged out of the Europeans because they've become so spineless and so dependent on American hegemony and American military might to protect them. But you'll never see a Chinese version of the WWE or even a Japanese version. That's why New Japan despite what all these in-ring worker nerds say, New Japan will never be a bigger global promotion than the WWE because it's a different type of culture. It's always going to be looked at as a carbon copy, in my opinion, of something that WWE's already done. You know, if there is no other purely American business, all American business, than the business of professional wrestling, which WWE has monopolized and perfected. It may not seem that way because mainstream culture derides wrestling because of what it's based on. It's based on you know underhanded tactics. But if you really think about it, the quintessential American businessman of the late 20th century after Walt Disney died was Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon embodied the spirit of American competitiveness, embodied the spirit of American ingenuity, and embodied the American spirit of risk taking. The same American spirit that enabled the American pioneers, rightly or wrongly, to go from sea to shining sea. He had that same vision in a wrestling context, that he would expand his territory from the East Coast to the whole world, and he's done that. And no other promoter can match it because they don't have Vince's mindset. They don't have Vince's originality. The big dog is saying it right here and right now that um, he's trying to teach his students in China about don't plagiarize, don't copy, don't use other people's tactics. Well, sorry, it's not going to be an uphill battle because different societies have different mentalities. And you can't make a dog a reptile. Right? And a lot of Americans, especially Americans on the political left, they lose sight of that, big dog, because to them, they're being fed a study diet of all of America's sins, everything that America has done wrong, everything, the imperialistic argument, which isn't really valid, especially when it comes to America. Not really, you know what I mean? Or, you know, the diet of, oh, America's unfair. They can't wait for the era of American hegemony to end. Well, I have news for you. China is like a house of cards. China is a facade. China is like AEW on the global stage. If WWE went out of business tomorrow, AEW would collapse too. If American hegemony and American military might ended in the world, China would collapse too. It's a house of cards. It can't be sustained. There's a reason why China was always a big player in the game in global politics, but it was never an empire. It was never the biggest civilization in the world outside of East Asia. Yeah, they've conquered other parts of East Asia around the world, but they have not ever conquered the world. Yep, yep, big dog, because communism and authoritarianism stifles the human spirit. Even in the medieval context, guys, Britain flourished because Britain had limits on its monarchy, limits on its authoritarianism in mostly all cases, especially after the Magna Carta, and France did not. France had an absolute monarchy. France had a stronger hierarchy. Britain didn't have that, and Britain succeeded. And the child of Britain, the offspring of Britain, America, has surpassed even Britain. It's kind of like Vince, bringing it back to wrestling, it's kind of like Vince the father, Vince Sr., the son took it even further than Vince Sr. had envisioned. So America was the baby and Britain was the mother, and America took it even further than Britain ever could. That's why we're speaking English today. We're conversing in English because those two nations, yeah, wow, big dog. Those two nations made it possible, and it's through freedom. It sounds cliche because you hear it all the time from the right as well as the left. Well, yeah, Triple H knows all about that. Oops, different China. You know, it sounds cliche because you hear it all the time from the right as well as the left. You hear all the time that the right and the left, you, you know, especially the right, you hear, oh, America's about freedom. Well, it's true. The entrepreneurial spirit allows um, avenues of entertainment like gangster rap or wrestling to flourish. You think that the Attitude Era would exist in a culture like Asia's? You think gangster rap would exist in a culture like Asia's that is that has filial piety or that has Confucianistic ideals or that has authoritarianism? No. you know, and if you think that you're delusional, you don't know anything about the world. Things like that would only flourish in a society where there's constraints on authoritarianism and constraints on, hierarchies. Are there hierarchies that developed in society naturally? People have different talents. Some people are better than others. That's the reality of society. Sure, even in the United States, is there problems with the West, particularly the United States? Sure, but freedom in the way we love it, as Big Dog found out going to China, wouldn't be allowed to flourish in other societies the way that it flourishes in the United States. Our heritage allows for that. Other people's heritage, China, for example, right? Maybe they would be, maybe they would be immensely creative, Big Dog, if the chains were lifted from them of their creativity. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they would inevitably, if communism were to fall tomorrow, they would inevitably, like the Russians, we talked about it before a lot in this channel, like the Russians, you know, inevitably the Russians fell from the Tsar to the Bolsheviks. After communism, 1991, they were controlled by the mafia. Organized crime was controlling them, and now they've gone to Putin. They are more. Their culture seems more attracted to authoritarianism. Maybe the Chinese will be similar, but I don't know because Hong Kong became an amazing power when they were under the British, regardless of how the circumstances that Britain acquired Hong Kong in the Opium Wars. Regardless of that, when they were under the British, they flourished a lot. Taiwan, even though it's not free, it's freer than China. Taiwan, you know, flourishes to some extent. South Korea, being democratic and being under the U.S. influence and the influence of the West, is flourishing now in the arts, but copying stuff that the U.S. has already done. These K-pop groups like BTS, they copy American pop groups that were popular in the 90s or British pop groups, that were popular in the 90s. So I don't know if they would be as creative, but their creative juices, the creative restraints will be let off them a lot more, and they could succeed a lot more if communism didn't exist. Communism, socialism, guys, and this Ironically, this ties into Cody Rhodes because kayfabe wise, his dad, Dusty Rhodes, fought against the communist Russians in Jim Crockett Promotions all throughout the 80s. Communism fails, you know, because it purports to treat everybody equally, everybody the same. But if you got a guy working 7 hours and every guy works 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, and we're all getting paid $2.50 an hour, and the guy that works more hours never gets a raise, then there is no incentive for that guy to succeed. The incentive to him to succeed and do better is lifted. Is lifted away from him. He has no incentive to do better. He just works and works and works. And he's like an automaton. And I'm sure Big Dog has seen this with the Chinese labor market. A lot of the Chinese laborers are very exhausted. They're like, oh man, I can't take this tremendous work schedules and I'm getting paid these shitty wages. And think about it. China now is a lot better than China, economically, has more economic liberalism now than it had under Mao. So if it's bad now, imagine how it was, in the beginnings of the Chinese Revolution, the 50s, 60s, that era before China was opened up in the 70s. So communism doesn't work because of that reason. A guy in the United States, for example, let's use wrestling. A guy like Cody Rhodes has the incentive to work a great match and potentially move up the card. But if there is no movement, it's like WCW. People in WCW's salaries were set in stone, so nobody had the incentive to work any harder to become any better and to move up the card. But in WWE, they had opportunities to do that. They had the incentive to do that. People knew if they worked hard, they would move up to the card and become main eventers. Well, communism is like WCW. Communism, there is no incentive to move up the economic ladder. There's no incentive to work harder because you're never going to move up the economic ladder. If you're a party member, you're a party member and you'll get the perks you'll get, but you won't get it. No little guy could become a big guy. No mid-carder, proverbial mid-carder, could ever become a main eventer in communist societies because the salaries and the wages and the levels of success are stagnated, just like in WCW. Whereas even Vince's famous line, I don't offer guarantees, I offer opportunities. That's a very American and capitalistic way of looking at it. I don't offer guarantees, I offer opportunities. In other words, you can work twice as hard and you stand a chance of being twice as successful. Sure, there are other factors that play a role, but your hard work is the main factor. But in communist societies, just like in WCW, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you'll never be at the top because your place in society is set in stone. And that's why those societies don't work, because the cream is never allowed to rise to the top in those societies because everybody is supposed to be treated equally, quote unquote. So creativity, initiative, hard work, all that stuff, all that good stuff that makes a dynamic and successful society is stifled in a society like communism because they want to live up to that ideal, kind of like WCW. WCW wanted to live up to that ideal too, that communist ideal. Basically, not saying that WCW or Ted Turner was communist, but they wanted to live up to that equity ideal. They wanted to pay every wrestler a guarantee. But every wrestler doesn't deserve a guarantee. You give a wrestler a guarantee, he's not going to work as hard as the next wrestler who doesn't have a guarantee but only has an opportunity. Because he already knows he's getting paid, and the top guys in the party or the top guys that are affiliated, they're not going to work as hard because they're already at the top. What incentive do they have to work as hard? So the whole ship sinks. That's why it doesn't work. Not because, okay, Reagan during the Cold War he couched it in good versus evil, right? And that's how it was done in wrestling angles too. The communists are evil, right? Well, as Anakin Skywalker said, evil. From my point of view, the Jedi are evil, and Obi-Wan Kenobi said, well, that's a point of view, and it's true. You might think capitalism is evil because some people make it and some don't. But you have to think, well, what are the factors that came into play for that person to make it? I'm pretty sure that person had to work just as hard as the next person to make it. In most cases in society, okay, yes, you have cases in societies, in capitalist societies, just like you have in communist societies, where people are born into a better situation. But they can lose that privilege and prestige in society as well. It's possible that they can lose that. You know what I mean? There are people who were millionaires and billionaires in the 1920s during the Gilded Age that are no longer that. When was the last time you heard about the Vanderbilts being that influential? Never. You don't really hear about them anymore. Or the Carnegies, people like that. Or even the Rockefellers to a certain extent or degree. These are still very wealthy families, but the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Jeff Bezoses and stuff have surpassed them because of hard work and initiative. But communist societies and other autocratic societies like Nazism and stuff, they remove, you know, the will to succeed from those people. They have no incentives to do better and to better their situation because they know that based on equity, they'll always be where they are. So that's why Soviet Union collapsed, and that's why people rushed to come to the United States from Cuba or communist China because of that reason, because they want to achieve their dreams. But America's the bad guy, but everybody wants to be here, but nobody is rushing to leave. And people always point to the bad stuff about American history, not saying America's perfect. Of course, there's no perfect system. When you could point me to a system created by imperfect human beings that is a perfect system, I I won't give you $1 million because I don't have $1 million. But if I had $1 million, I would give you $1 million. Right? Because there is no perfect system. There's no perfect system created by perfect human beings. Every system has flaws. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst system of government ever created, except for all the other ones. Everything else has been tried, and everything else has failed. Democracy, capitalism is the best system that human beings have ever come up with. That's the best we got. You know what I mean? Maybe if you're religious, you believe that there is a better system out there. But socialism, communism is surely not it. you know, you know what I mean? It's surely not it. That has been tried before and that has failed before. I don't think libertarianism is it either. I believe in libertarianism as far as personal, but we've seen the effects of hardcore libertarianism in regards to business and work. We saw that in the laissez-faire era of the 1920s, the early industrialist era. It wasn't working out well. The government does have a role, I believe, to play when it comes when it comes to protecting the rights and certain rights of citizenships and workers. Is even why in professional, and that's a perfect example. A lot of people don't believe in unions in professional wrestling. Even Cody Rhodes and Tony Khan didn't either, because what a union would do is it would stifle the business and it would cripple the business, because that individualistic nature that that is at the heart of wrestling, the desire to get over that the individual has, or that the two people wrestling in the match have, will be stifled by a union, because you will then have to represent the wants and the needs and the desires of the collective at the expense of the individual. If you had a union, oh well, this guy can't get over, you know, this guy can't get over too much because his pay will increase, and that will upset other members of the union. So they would have to keep you at a low level. Okay, big dog. We went on pretty long, but we we got a lot in. Of course, thank you for contributing. You know, hope you have a great day, and you know, just keep watching good old fashioned American professional wrestling, and hopefully this COVID shit will finally blow over there, and you'll be allowed to return to the good old United States. Big dog, it's been real. Peace. And you guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Lost a couple of subscribers, lost like one subscriber yesterday, kind of felt down about it, but you know what? I keep on persevering. Peace. And night two for WrestleMania this year, WrestleMania 38. Love you guys.